Hi, I'm Michael P. Coleman, Content Director for Brother Be Well. I want to invite you to sit back and relax and listen in on this conversation. We're going to be talking about something that I personally think is critical for boys and men of color. We're going to talk about how to apologize. It might sound simple, but it's not something that we always learn. We don't certainly don't learn it in our collective communities. Maybe families were lucky, and you might have learned that along the way. I typically personally rather learned it as we kind of went along. So we decided to put this together as part of our partnership with the Hawk Institute. They do some amazing mentoring work in our public schools, and I'll introduce those a couple of Hawk Institute colleagues in just a second. But we got a great panel in addition to them to help us talk about how to apologize. We've got a couple of youth guests. Ted Ngatia. Ted, what's up? Welcome back.
Hello, thank you.
Really
Welcome.
good. Really good to have you. Good to see you, Ted. We've also got Mustafa Zuwaini. Mustafa, what's up?
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Always good to have you too. Always good to have you, man. We've got we talked. I talked about Hawk Institute. We've got another partner in HearYou.org, a group of amazing mental health clinicians, and one of them is with us tonight, Dr. Carlos Martinez. He lovingly goes by Dr. Carlos. And earlier today, I shortened it to Dr. C. What's up, Dr. C?
How's it going? Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Really good to have you. We've also got Patrick Ma. He's one of our Brother Be Well advisors. He's a physician assistant. He's a great friend of mine. Patrick Ma, what's up?
Hey, Michael. Good to be here.
Really good to have you here. And then we've got a couple of people from the Hawk Institute. Jonathan Murry is one of the mentors that I talked about in the public schools, working very directly with our youth. Jonathan, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, Michael? Glad to be here.
Really good to have you. And finally, D'Angelo Smith. He joins Jonathan in those schools, mentoring for the Hawk Institute. What's up, D'Angelo?
Hey, how you doing?
Really, really good. Good to have you. Good to have everybody. Let's get at this. And Dr. Carlos, I'm going to ask you to start us out. I introed the topic a little bit, but how to apologize. You know, it's not something you necessarily see in a mental health textbook. I didn't study mental health in school, but I would imagine that that's not something that you necessarily think about there being a mental health connection. But why don't you talk about it and help us connect it to why for our own or someone else's mental health is learning to apologize beneficial?
Yeah, thanks. So when I first found out that this was a topic, learning how to apologize, I was like, oh, cool, I got this. Not that big of a deal. And I realized, oh, you know what? It's more of a bigger deal than what it appears to be. So when it comes to apologizing or learning to apologize, it's a complicated subject, right? And like you said, Mike, you know, it may not be something that we learn, especially with people of color, males, men. It's a macho thing usually, or sometimes, to suck it up. Why am I supposed to apologize? So when it comes to the mental health aspect, as a clinician working with individuals of color, working with couples, working with organizations, a lot of issues come into play when we don't apologize for hurting someone's feelings. Relationship distress is technically the clinical term that we deal with. And it can be spouses, partners, it can be coworkers, it can be father and son, you know, a lot of good conversation there, or mother and daughter and stuff. It just leads to a lot of things that can go down that rabbit hole of unsaid and issues that aren't resolved. And if it's not resolved, it can just lead into a lot more issues when it comes to relationship and well-being.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes we might be oversimplifying it, but sometimes when I see, and I want to pull our youth into this conversation for sure, sometimes when I see altercations among young people and things sometimes can escalate, and I'm the first one to say that, you know, that three-letter word ego can get in the way and keep me from saying what needs to be said and keep the other person, and then everybody's in their separate camp, right? And when I see things in the media where there's been an altercation or God forbid a shooting or there's been some violence, I wonder, did those young people learn if somebody had just apologized early on and before it escalated, then maybe the outcome could have been a little bit different. I don't know. What's your take on this? Our esteemed youth, they're always my favorite contributors during these podcasts and videos. Ted, what do you think generally about, you know, you're obviously here. You wanted to talk about, you know, how to apologize. Why is it important to you to learn about it? And why do you think it needs to be on youth's radar?
I mean, I think it's always been an important thing to be able to do. I know it takes work. I think personally speaking, learning how to apologize from a young age, I think it definitely makes it easier as you know, grow up, and, you know, it helps you to be able to be humble in different situations, because you learn to do it young. So as you know, grew up, it meant that it wasn't as hard. And that's 200% true for me. My parents kind of instilled that within me in terms of like having a humble spirit, and, you know, if I made a mistake, being humble enough to apologize for that, especially if I genuinely felt that I did that. But they taught me that from a very young age, and I grew up in a different country. I grew up in Kenya, in Africa. So I love that they taught me that, because it meant when I came to the US and when I went to different places, I that kind of stuck with me, and even to this day it's still with me, and I love that, because it's not always the easiest, but I just feel like it's just such an important personality trait to have, and it makes things a lot easier. For sure, maybe, you know, it avoids a lot of arguments with people if you know you genuinely did something wrong and you want to humble yourself to apologize for that. So I think it's if you learn it young, then it helps you as you grow older, and I think it's such a valuable thing to have. For
I
sure.
think you're right. We're going to see a video that touches on something that you just said, Ted. So I don't want to give a spoiler here, but we're going to get at something you just said in a few minutes. Mustafa, I want to pull you in. What are your thoughts about your other youth contributor tonight? Why do you think it needs to be on everybody's radar? And frankly, why do you think the onus is on my generation or other generations to help young people learn how to apologize, or do you?
Well, for me, when I grew up in my environment, I grew up in a different country, and in Middle East, basically, you don't apologize often. It's the thing is, when you make a mistake, you usually the way to apologize is to never do it again or not repeat the action. That's like the best way you could apologize. It's your actions could show that you're truly sorry. But when I came to the United States, it really escalated things. It got much bigger than they were starting off. So this was like a butterfly effect. So I did learn how to apologize. So it was a little hard change to apologize. But when I want the situation not to get worse, and I know I'm in the wrong, or like I know I did something wrong, I would have to apologize. I would have to go over my pride and just de-escalate things and not get them worse.
I appreciate hearing that, Mustafa. And I got a quick follow-up question for you, because you mentioned pride. I'd like to get into that a little bit later too. But do you find, and I struggle with that as well, do you find that when you can overcome pride, the response is far less than what you've told yourself? Like, you know, in the Black community too, we are a prideful people. Who, Ted, you would agree with me. You weren't born in this country. Jonathan, D'Angelo, we are some proud Black men. So when I'm locked into it and I know I was wrong and I know I've said something and it kind of, I forget the term you just worked, Ted. You said something like you're compelled to apologize. You have to do that. You're led to do it. But that pride kicks in. I have found if I can drop the pride and just say, I am sorry, the response is never what I've told myself in my head. Nobody ever says, I know you're sorry. And but everybody always appreciates hearing those words, because we all make mistakes. We all say things and do things. We don't get it right all the time. So would you agree, Mustafa and Ted, before I pivot, I want to talk to our Hawk mentors in a second. Would you agree that it's always in our best interest to put the ego aside?
Yeah, definitely. It's not always the easiest, like you said. It takes. I struggle with it a lot of the times. So yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Yeah. Let's ask we got a couple of Hawk mentors here, D'Angelo and Jonathan. D'Angelo, let's start with you. You're working with young people in the public schools. Can you recall an incident where you were mentoring a youth or working with a young person, and the short, simple answer was, dude or young lady, you need to go apologize. You were wrong. And when you're wrong, a man admits they're wrong. That's my personal opinion. If I'm wrong, I'm less of a man if I can't admit that, because I certainly didn't have any problem flapping off at the mouth and saying what I wanted to say. So if I had the nerve to say that, I need to go back to the person and say, okay, that didn't come out right at the very least, or I was wrong to say that. Can you recall an incident when you were working with young people in the schools and you had to deliver that advice? And then if so, how was it received? And then Jonathan, same question for you.
I wouldn't say a student in the schools, but I have worked with some of my younger cousins and kind of their peers, because when I go home, I kind of tap in with them and make sure they're all right. And there's been plenty of cases where it may have been most of my experiences is there over a girl. You know, one gets to talking to another girl, another, they feel like that's theirs, but they don't communicate. They don't say, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you two were talking, or things of that nature. And then it gets into a point where that pride that you were saying, that ego kind of takes over. But, you know, one of the things that I try to do is I try to also lead by example for them. You know, I'm often first to apologize, mainly because I know how hard it is. And sometimes it takes that first person to show that little bit of weakness in order to encourage the vulnerability from everybody else. So one of the things I try to do with my younger cousins and the younger children I know is let them see how to apologize by using myself as an example. So anything that I may have done wrong, I say, I'm sorry, I acknowledge that this is what I did wrong, and kind of try to set that example for them. So those are mainly the time they normally do it, or they'll take my advice. I don't know if I don't really follow up. I let them make that choice, but I try to lead by example. And they're like, yeah, you know what? You know, I've seen what you did. I try to do that too. And sometimes it works out. Sometimes they don't take it. But yeah, it's just been a couple of times, mostly over girls, or, you know, if you talk about your shoes, talk about the clothes, you know, kind of embarrass them. That makes it a little bit harder in that public setting to kind of say, nah, I'm going to apologize. That was wrong. When kind of rile up and going. So those are the cases that I've seen and that I've tried to mentor my younger cousins and brothers with that, and just say, hey, look, it's really not worth all of the trouble that you're bringing to yourself. Yeah. Because one thing about this world now is that, and you guys know this, is things could turn on a second. You know, you could be here one day and be gone the next. You know, it's nothing for somebody to pull out a gun and, you know, end your life over the things you're talking to. I'm sorry, but real quick, one of the stories my dad told me about road rage in Atlanta, Georgia. Everybody got guns. So one day he was telling me that he was this dude cut him off. So he's mad, and even though this is just back lane road, there's no traffic, but he was like, man, they cut me off. I had to get back. And then he cut him off. He recut him off. And then the dude pulled him over, got out the car with a gun, and said, the only reason I won't shoot you right now is because I have my daughters in the car. I'm taking them to school. And he said that was the last time he ever honked or cut anybody off, and just it's like he should have apologized. He was wrong and he knew it, and that kind of sets the example for me too. So
I appreciate you sharing that, D'Angelo. Jonathan, I'm gonna get to you in 1 second, but you mentioned road rage, D'Angelo. So I'm gonna pull in Mr. Road Rage himself, Patrick Ma, who was in a recent production with us just yesterday. And look at Patrick. I mean, little sweet face, little gentle face. When he confided that he is the king of road rage, we were all like, what? So, Patrick, how did that sound to you when you just heard a story about someone that could have escalated? And you're right, D'Angelo. We unfortunately live in a world. My father was no one was bigger of a road rage driver than my dad. But back when I was growing up, we didn't even worry about somebody pulling out a gun and shooting them. That was not going to happen back in those days. Patrick, what would you have to say about, you know, this road rage connection? And I'm joking a little bit, but as it relates to our topic, asking, learning to apologize, you know, you've talked about people cutting you off. Would it have made a difference if, instead of you reacting? What if the person that pulled up next to you and rolled out the window and said, I'm really sorry? I almost hit a pedestrian the other day. I turned up in, it wouldn't have been my fault, but I turned up in a little strip mall where my grocery store is. And this guy walked out of the pizza place with his pizza. And because of where he was holding the pizza, his peripheral vision was gone. So he just literally kind of jogged out into the street, and I had just made the right. So luckily I hit the brakes. And he stopped and I stopped. And although he was in the wrong, dude, you don't run out of a pizza place. I apologized. I said, "Oh, wow, I'm really sorry. I didn't see you there." And I pulled into my spot, and the young man walked up, and I thought, is this going to go further than this? I already apologized. And he then apologized. He said, "I am so sorry. I was hungry. I was holding my food." So it was like the mutual apology society. But that was an example where even though I wasn't in the wrong, I apologized right up front.